3, 2, 1. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, yet another wonderful interview and yet another wonderful subject. Bit different, but seeing as this is about the world of Salvation Army music, when an opportunity like this comes up, I don't refuse it. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have Stuart Hall on board for an interview. Some people may be familiar with the name of Hall. I have become very familiar with it in the last few years. Very good friend of mine, Auntie Jessie, now soldiers at Woodbridge Corps, and her father was Adam, who composed Rejoice, which was then harmonised by the late great Leslie Condon. And Stuart is very much a family member. So I know Stuart very well. But I was very interested because I've been talking a lot about the beginnings of Army music and the structure and the composition. You're very much at the other end of the spectrum now, because you're collating it and becoming the custodian to these recordings. And for many years, the idea of having, outside of the traditional yearly LP or EP or cassette from Staff Band or Chalk Farm, it didn't happen. So in your personal, how did you start going into, because I know Ian Barton for many years was collating all the old 78s and LPs. So where did your paths intersect, and how did you start thinking about taking on this gargantuan project?
Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. I feel honoured to be a guest in a process where you've been looking at all composers. I think the only thing I've composed is kind of potatoes and cabbages in the garden. You're making reference to things like Regal Zonophone. I think, like a lot of people around the Army world, we've all been fascinated by Regal Zonophone, the website that was put together by Ian Barton. And, I think all of us have dived in at some stage and recalled memories when we've looked at a particular LP or a recording, and it brings back lots of memories and lots of, warm thoughts, if you like. So I think everybody was aware of that. But it was a few years ago, I was in Australia with the International Staff Band on tour. And as will happen in a lot of these corps, you arrive at the next corps and they have a welcome meal for you. And we were sitting on these long tables, and the ISB were on one side of the table, and on the opposite side were the bandsmen from the local corps. The guy sat right opposite me. I didn't know him, and I introduced myself. He introduced himself to me, and it was Ian Barton. So I immediately extolled the virtues of a Regal Zonophone and how much I really enjoy it. And he thanked me very much for that. But there was something that he said in that conversation which said, I've been doing it for 20 years and I just need a break. And I kind of want to, I feel whether I should kind of give it up, or I should pass it on, or I should kind of just leave it or pull the plug or what. All I could think of is, wow, no, Ian, you can't do that. 20 years of your hard work in collating all that information, we can't just let that go down the pan. So I sown a seed with him then that I would be very interested to get involved, to help him in some way. When I came back to the UK, I got in touch, and it was probably 2 years went by before we actually, if you like, exchanged on the ownership of the Regal Zonophone website. What I was able to do is, with the skills that I've got in terms of web design and web building, etc., I was able to show to Ian that there were other ways that we could actually display the website and make it more friendly, more user interactive, etc. And when he saw the screen designs that I put together, he was going, "Wow, I just can't do that."
Yeah.
It also turned out that Ian wanted to kind of go off and do more caravan holidays.
Yeah.
With his wife, and he was feeling that he couldn't do that and also look after Regal Zonophone. So we exchanged, if you like, databases. I brought the Regal Zonophone database across to the UK, set it up within a website. But Ian is still very much part of the system. And at the end of the day, it's really, he created that baby.
Yeah.
And it's only right that he still has some input, which he does, and we regularly get in touch and and pass information either way. But of course, the situation now is that whereas Ian would get lots and lots of old LPs and 78 sent to him in Australia, people have got the option. They can send them to me or they can send them to Ian. So just this week, I've had 21 cassettes arrive on my doorstep. And guess what? Every single one of those cassettes are not on Regal Zonophone.
Yeah.
So there is still a lot more out there to kind of collate and put in there. But obviously, I'm conscious of things like copyright law. And I had a very important meeting with SPNS, with Trevor Caffel, to discuss where we go with things like that, because clearly there are boundaries that need to be made sure that they're there. And that's one of the things that we have. So basically, it does mean that any recording from the SPNS label or any label that SPNS now own after 1980, then we can maybe put it up on the website, but we can't let people hear the tracks. And that's to keep in line with the copyright and the publisher's wishes. But there's still plenty of recordings out there for Regal Zonophone.
Yeah. Is it something that sort of you were aware of or not? That obviously, being a traveller and listening to the plethora of Salvation Army music is out there. Of course, the traditional visit to Judge Street to get the latest CD or LP was almost an institution. But I remember when I was a kid, my local core band at Woodbridge done a private cassette tape of just hymn tune recordings for the local churches, and it was just a fundraising for the local core. So you have a lot of private recordings done for outside, but not by the SPNS label. So how much of that do you get involved in? How much of that impacts on Regal Zonophone? Oh, and I've lost him.
Okay.
Yeah.
You'll have to edit it.
Yeah, these glitches do happen. So how does Regal Zonophone handle recordings that are outside the SPNS label? Because I know of several Salvation Army bands that have done LPs and cassettes using local producers and local recording studios.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a tour money to raise money for a tour to a building project. How do you handle that?
Yeah, so the way that we're handling that at the moment is that we're going through each of the we're going through each of the recordings one by one and actually identifying who the publishers are. There's quite a long list at the moment, and then we're having to do research on who those recordings, who those companies are. Are they still in business, or who now owns them? So you take something like EMI. EMI have passed hands 2 or 3 times. And then what we've done now is we've been, over the last 6 months, is now writing to each one of those publishers, letting them know about Regal Zonophone, letting them know about what we have of theirs on the website, and asking basically for their permission for this to continue. Now, so far, we haven't had any of them come back and say no. We've had 1 or 2 come back and ask, well, why would we want to do that in the first place? But of course, most of them have actually written back and said thank you very much, because a lot of people just put music up on YouTube and don't gain permission. So there are 1 or 2 that have not replied. Now that could be because we've got the wrong address. It could be that the company's no longer around, or it's such a large company that maybe it's gone to the wrong department. So we've got a plan for how we kind of refocus on that and send them another letter, etc., etc. So the idea is that in every stage is we keep the right side of the law.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something I think a lot of people wouldn't know how to. I mean, I had various conversations. I'm sure you've had very similar conversations, about if William Booth was alive today, he'd be doing this and that. I said, well, if William Booth was alive today, I'd be telling him I don't want a criminal record, because you can get pulled over for doing something, just go out there, start a radio station. I said, it's not as easy as that.
No.
There's a lot of things involved. In those days, yes, sir, you paid the constable, you appeared, you paid your fine. Now you'd have a criminal record, and that would inhibit future employment prospects. So it's a different world. I'm kind of interested, because what happens if I get people say, Nana's died or she's moved into a home. and she hasn't got room for these books and recordings. Do you want them? You can make more use of them. And they're from companies that no longer exist, or they were done literally, you know, on an old cassette player at the hall and duplicated by the YP band member on his super duper stereo system of the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, these things are now sort of, they've got a favourite march and a hymn tune setting in the band's favourite piece of maybe Blythe Heritage or something. How do you handle recordings of that nature?
Well, I think it's fair to say that yes, there are some recordings that have come our way, which, frankly, we've not been able to kind of pursue it any further. You know, they're not a reasonable quality, or they weren't. It may have been that somebody just had an ordinary tape recorder, and you know, stood in front of the band and just held up this microphone towards the band, etc.
Guilty.
I mean, that kind of recording, we've had a number of those sent to us, and they're not really the kind of recordings that that you know we're looking for. But with any other recording, again, the same thing matters, is that, you know, we look at the recording, we look at the label, we find out who the publishers are, and if you go on the Regal Zonophone website and choose an LP, you'll see that we've actually got a category to say who the record label is. And if we don't know who that record label is, because frankly there are some LPs that when they were produced, there's nothing on the sleeve notes, there's nothing on the on the actual LP itself that says who the publishers were. So we've actually put a question mark, and we've said to anybody out there, do you know, if you know that answer, if you know the answer to the question, please let us know. In the same way, I did put up something on one particular LP saying, oh, this was recorded in 1965. And straight away, somebody came back to me and said, no, you've got it wrong. It was 1964. Great. I'll change it to 1964. Yeah. If and they were absolutely able to say it was 64 because they were actually on the LP.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges that I would love to be able to do now would be able to kind of, build that out even further. You know, let's start talking. Let's get some stories from people who were actually on those recordings, whether it was in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, or whatever, because there's always lots of stories about how some of these recordings were put together. And let's face it, it would be nice to have an oral or a written historical aspect to that, as well as having the recording as well. Yeah,
I find it very interesting because, being as you know, any composer is thrilled to have music played, and you're a core band master, and you've been in the ISB for many years, so you've seen, you know, hundreds of composers, you know, who would only dream of having their music appear on the stands of the ISB, and you've had some very fortunate experiences. So when you sort of started going through this mammoth task of collating and going through it, were there any kind of, you know, for you, major surprises as regarding maybe a piece of composition from a well-known composer that's almost forgotten about or hadn't even realized had been recorded?
Gosh, yeah, that's a very interesting question. Because
I'm glad it's, because if it was boring,
I'm glad, yeah. Well, you know, it's making me think, because you know, when I've been I think for me, it's been more. It's not necessarily I found a surprise or that I didn't know that had been recorded, but it's actually hearing the quality of some of the musicians from those days gone by.
Yeah.
You know, even if you go back as far as the old 78s, there's some real, especially in the brass band playing, there's some really tight playing. You know, it's so sharp and so kind of together, far more than some of the bands that we have today.
Yeah.
But there's some, what has surprised me, I think, really, has been the quality of not necessarily band or songs music, but more the contemporary stuff. You know, some of the, if you like, the pop groups that we had, not just the Joy Strings, but some of the other ones. Like I came across one LP the other day called Good News. Now, I believe that they were in the Woking area or the Wokingham area or something like that. But a fantastic LP. And I didn't know that was around. So, yeah, there are some there's some golden nuggets in there. When you think there are currently over 1,200 albums, and something in the region of 25 to 26,000 tracks. There's a lot to get through.
Yeah. I suppose from your point of view, it's very, you have the facility to be able to tell the difference, but have you noticed the quality? I mean, you see occasionally on sleeve notes, and I think some of the old 78 CD recordings a few years ago, it was noted that you could hear the scraping of a chair to be moved, and the bass drummer rattling off in the wrong place and the echo coming, whereas nowadays that just would be eliminated at the recording stage. And we imagine all these things with the bridge of the Starship Enterprise with the control desk and everything pigeonholed, but do you still come across things like that where you can actually, you put the LP on and you're transferring it and you're digitizing it, and you can almost hear the echo of the recording studio?
You can. I think it's what you do find, especially when you're, especially if you're listening with the headphones on. So there's nothing else kind of in your sphere. It's literally you're just concentrating on that music. It's actually hearing, especially on a band, hearing them all breathe in at the same time.
Yes.
And then and then going for it. And especially with a 78, you kind of think, well, that they actually had to do that in one take.
Yeah.
So there is an element where you'll hear maybe one of the instrumentalists may just come in just slightly early than perhaps that they should have done. But in the overall scheme of things, that's where I think the tightness of their playing in the 78s is so fantastic that they managed to do it in one take. I did receive a recording some time ago from Steve Buller, who sent something through, and he said, you might want to listen to this. He said, but ignore the noise between letter D in the first bar. That's where the euphonium player dropped his pencil. So now, obviously, yeah, I can. It was nice to know that there's a musician out there that actually has a pencil on his stand, but also, but obviously, with today's technology, I could go along to that and just take that out because it was in the right place where I could take it out. But I try not to do that. I want the recordings to be as unique as they were when they first were bought all those years ago.
Yeah. I mean, you've been involved with a lot of recordings yourself. So, were there any kind of surprises for you as this recording, as an LP or a release that you'd never even, I'm not necessarily thinking of the International Staff Band or the Staff Songsters, but I would imagine, we can guess that SPS probably has some kind of record of what they actually released. So how much of that were you aware of when you were putting together, like, say, is this someone's, oh, well, sure, this got released through SPS, and you'd have to go, okay, well, would you have the ability to say, did you actually release this, or was it done as a private recording?
No, I haven't had that opportunity. But I mean, that's the first thing I look at when I get a recording, is to find out who the publishers were. And as I say, there are just the odd one or two, and they do tend to be recordings that are from like America or from Australia, where it doesn't have any publishing on there. There's the occasional private recording. I came across a recording the other day of Carlisle Wipey Band. And I haven't listened to it yet, but it's down on the floor next to me here, ready to the next things I'll be looking at. But that it was very much a private recording. Now that could cause an issue, because I don't know actually, first of all, what's on there. Secondly, is it playable? But also, I don't have any knowledge of who the conductor was or when it was actually recorded. So there's a little bit of research there. There may be somebody at Carlisle that might remember it. There may be somebody in that area that might remember it being on it. So that's the excitement for me. It's actually building that up further to make it even more knowledgeable.
So how does your, you get the cassettes, you get the LPs through, and you go through the process of playing them through and identifying the tracks and saying, okay, that's definitely the Kingdom Triumphant, that's definitely Resurgam, and so forth. What's, once you've got the tracks on the computer or on your software, what's the next stage? What's the process for you?
Well, once we've digitalized them, it's a fairly straightforward process. We literally put them up into the database of Regal Zonophone, along with the artwork And if it's an LP, we like to try and at least get the front cover and the back cover. And then also we like to have a picture of the label on the actual record itself, for both the A side and the B side. Yeah, that goes into a fairly large database. And once it's there, there's a little button on there which I can click that then says, right, that's now live. So if there is an issue that I've got in terms of I'm not too sure who the publishers are, I can hold it back for a while. But but if once I've put the tick in the box, if you like, it's then live on the website. That bit is actually the easiest bit of the whole process.
Have you ever come across recordings that were thought lost, or that they didn't exist anymore? I mean, prolific when they came out and just almost forgotten about, and dropped down the back of the cupboard in Grandad's shed kind of thing?
Well, interesting enough, one conversation I had with Ian some time ago, Ian Barton, was if we looked at the 78 records, Ian, has Regal Zonophone got them all? Now, to his knowledge, there are 4 that are missing.
That's
and we've been compiling a list in a spreadsheet to kind of find out what we've currently got and what's missing. And the only way that we know at the moment, and this is where we may go back to SPNS and say, look, have you got a record, or have you got a knowledge of what this record was? Because we've got, for example, we've got the first 78 was September 1928 or 1929. It was the ISB, and on side A, the ISB conducted by Brigadier Fuller, and they're playing the march, The Liberator.
Yeah.
And that's marked up as SA1. So we've got SA2, 3, 4, and 5, but we haven't got number 6. Then we've got 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So what I'm looking to do is try and identify what those 4 albums were, or 4 records. And then on our website is then be able to put them up on the website and say, look, these are the 4 recordings of 78s that we don't have. If anybody's got them, could they send it through to us? And if anybody wants them back after we've digitalized them, we will happily package them up and send them back. We don't want to kind of have I haven't got enough room in my house.
I was going to say, what happens to the LPs once you've put them on? I mean, are they put in central storage somewhere, or?
No, there is a record buff salvationist in America who is more than happy to receive all the records and cassettes once we're finished with them. He then deep cleans them, steams them, whatever, and puts them into his own record library. Goodness knows what size library he's got, but hey.
Probably Carnegie Hill size by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, I'd like, was it a case of when you took over Regal Zonophone and to try and to modernize the site, when did the idea of Fortress Radio enter the arena?
It's an interesting question. It came on from Fortress Radio. So in the summer of last year, I was getting kind of calls from people here in the UK saying, as you said earlier, my dad's passed away. I've inherited his record collection. I don't want it. Would you like it? Or elderly people who are saying, look, I haven't got room for this anymore. Would you like these old 78s? Now, even though we've got all of them bar 4, we didn't want to turn anybody down. Yeah. So we'll go out and meet people. And there was a theme that was coming back from a lot of people saying, I only wish I could get to the army. I'm too old. I can't get to the army anymore. And I, these thoughts were kind of rattling around in my head, and I wasn't doing anything about it. And then at Bandmasters Councils, or Music Leaders Councils, as it is now, last year, I was talking to somebody who said, I really enjoy Regal Zonophone, but I can only play 1 track at a time, or I can play 1 LP at a time. Is there any way that you can do it so that we can do kind of downloads, or we can have it going 24/7? Well, no, we can't, because that was against the publisher's wishes, and that's part of the things that we're adhering to for SPNS. But it did make me think that there's a number of tracks here that people would like to listen to. So after a bit of investigation, came across the idea of starting a radio station. Now, immediately we thought, well, we've got all the tracks in Regal Zonophone, but the trouble is we don't know who all the publishers are on those. We went and took legal advice. So there is a law firm in central London that I did a few visits to, where I spoke to a partner whose whole job is just to deal with copyright in the music industry. And I had some very, very good constructive conversations with him. And we found it was going to be easier to use a CD that's been published in the last year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever, because all the information that I would need to provide to the PPL, the licensing company, or the PRS is there. Whereas some of those older recordings, we don't have enough information. So, so I set about researching about doing a radio show, looked at various bits of software, watched lots of YouTube videos, read some books. Fortunately, I had two former colleagues from business who were both married to BBC producers. So it was a case of invite them round for dinner and have a long chat with his wife, and say, look, you're a BBC producer. How would you deal with this? And how would you do that? And how would you set up this? And how would you set up that? And from that, I decided that, yeah, I think this is something that would be worthwhile, and did a little bit of research with a lot of older people, and found that there was quite a lot. Excuse me. There was quite a lot of people that just couldn't get out to the army anymore, or if they did get out to the army in the morning, when they're living on their own, they're spending the rest of the day on their own. And so I thought, well, you know, even if we can just reach out to one or two of those people and just give them something more, something that they're craving for. Looked at schedules and thought, well, what do I do? How do I set this up? So realized that Sunday was the day that people were talking about. And I thought, well, I can remember, even in my lifetime, being at a call where there was 3 meetings and 3 open airs on a Sunday. So why don't we start with that? When I first joined the ISB, we did 3 meetings and 3 open airs on a Sunday, and a knee drill. So I thought, well, let's sling a knee drill in at the beginning as well.
Not old enough to do a knee drill. I'm not. I can do just 3 meetings on a Sunday and the Sunday evening open air. Knee drills are definitely before my time.
Well, you know, when I first joined the ISB, knee drills were every weekend that we did. It all started off with knee drill, and of course, most of the corps that we went to, their knee drills had stopped years ago. But obviously, it was a tradition that you had to have a knee drill when the ISB were there. So that helped me put together some schedules and timings for the Sunday. And I looked at some CDs of my own CDs from my own stock and thought, I think these will be a good ones to start with. I filled it out with 1 or 2 tracks from Fortress Radio to begin with, but then that was just enough to kind of get me going for the first couple of Sundays until I could put more CDs on, more tracks. And we launched in February of this year, a lot earlier than what we actually planned. I have to haste to add. The original plan was to launch in Easter of this year. So we thought that would be a really good time. There's a lot happening in the army world around Easter, so we can make it a really big weekend, set about how we're going to market it, how we're going to launch it on social media, etc. Something happened about 3 or 4 weeks before Easter, and it just made me go, do you know what, just go for it. Just switch the thing on and go live. So we switched it on one Sunday, and we put a little bit of information out on social media saying, here's this new radio station. And in that first Sunday, when we hit 50 listeners, we went, oh, wow, 50 listeners. When it got to the next week and we got 100 listeners, that was even great. I thought, yeah, this is great. And, you know, if we're going to hit 100 listeners on a Sunday and there's 100 people out there that are going to benefit from this, then it's worthwhile. We booked a meeting to go and talk to a THQ to say, look, this is what we're going to do, and is there any way we can help, you know, promote stuff that's happening at THQ or the army in general. The meeting was booked for a Wednesday for like 2 weeks away, and on the Monday of that week, the Prime Minister stood up in his box and said, I'm going to lock everybody down.
Yeah.
So, so I guess what you could say is, we launched 4 weeks earlier than we were going to launch.
Mm-hmm.
But in those 4 weeks, we were able to iron out little niggles. We were able to work out how to make things better and how to do it better.
Yeah.
And it meant that when the lockdown came, we already had 2 or 3 weeks of experience. And we suddenly went from just broadcasting on a Sunday to broadcasting 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And on the first Sunday in lockdown, we had over 5,000 people tune in.
Yeah.
So, so it was quite a surprise, maybe. Although maybe I shouldn't be surprised. There was obviously a divine intervention there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about God being in all our plans, and certainly there was a moving, if you like, of the Holy Spirit to make sure that we actually had this moving and working before the lockdown arrived.
Yeah.
We regularly get big audiences now on a Sunday. I haven't had the figures for June yet because June hasn't finished.
Yes.
But for May, we had over 46,000 listeners in the month of May,
Mm-hmm.
which is phenomenal. And that's just for the UK. We do have 1 or 2 people that have been able to kind of get around the system and listen to it in Australia and also in America. And I think that's because they've downloaded the app.
Mm-hmm.
But when the system that we're using is designed that it records where everybody's IP address is. And so obviously if their IP address is in America, it says, I'm sorry, but Fortress Radio doesn't have a license to broadcast in America. But I think 1 or 2 people have managed to get around that by downloading the app or listening on another radio station that's using that we've
or the VPN probably.
Or the VPN or something,
Yeah. One thing I'm kind of interested in is that obviously you've said that a lot of people have said, they can't get to the army anymore. And you have this kind of the wind up the morning meeting, the afternoon praise meeting. How far are you willing to go that as a Salvation Army radio station? Because to quote a very famous, to serve the present age. And there's something really lovely. And I think many Salvationists are guilty of it, Have a Glory March and, the band plays the Liberator, Star Lake, Divine Communion, the songs to sing, a wonderful Sidney Cox song. How do you balance that with the fact that we've got new recordings and new musicians coming out who are making still a very valid contribution, and you are an internet radio station for the 21st century, utilising all the, the musical ability of the Salvation Army that we can access? How do you handle the balance?
That's a good question, Mon, because the first thing is there's not enough CDs of, let's call it contemporary style or contemporary worship. There's not enough of those compared to brass band and songsters, between core bands and songsters. So that's the first challenge is getting enough good quality music that we can actually play. Every track that goes onto the database of Fortress Radio has a tag put against the side of each track. So the tag might be, this is a hymn tune arrangement, this is a march, this is a songster piece, this is an epic number, this is a hymn tune. And we do have a category for contemporary, for male vocal, female vocal, etc. What we have done is I can see straight away by looking at the software how many people are listening at this moment in real time. And what we did at first is we had the whole list meeting from 11 till 12 on a Sunday morning. And then at 12 o'clock we had contemporary worship. And clearly that was at the wrong time of the day. Because we would see the numbers of people listening to the radio station literally just plummet from about 12 to about 10 past 12. And when I mean plummet, 5,000 people on there, suddenly 5,000 has gone down to about 110. Quite a major drop. So we are currently investigating how we can actually reintroduce that in a different way. It may, and one of the things that we're going to be doing very soon is actually getting out a survey to all our listeners, or as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, yeah, we want to know, you know, what do you want to listen to? How do you want to listen to it? When do you want to listen to it? We're talking to 1 or 2 young people in the Army. When I say young people, you know, people less than the age of 30, so a lot younger than me, to find out, you know, when would they listen to a radio station? What would they want to listen to, and how would they want to listen to it? You know, there's a really big debate at the moment. For example, if we take the Wholeness meeting on a Sunday morning, there's a big debate about should we use this particular tune, which is a good Salvation Army tune played by a brass band,
Mm-hmm.
or do we use that tune? It's the same tune, but it's played with an organ, and it's clearly a choir or a congregation singing.
Yeah.
And you know, we've had information come in from listeners saying, no, we would much prefer just have the band. And we've had others come in and say, we're very happy to have the organ. You know, I remember when Blackpool Citadel had a big organ. I remember when Boscombe had a big organ. So the one thing you realize when you're running a solution like Fortress Radio is you can never please everybody. However, I'm keen to understand what do people want and how do they want it. And so through doing a questionnaire, hopefully we'll get some feedback that we can actually, you know, we'd be more than happy to change the schedules. You know, if people came back and said, we want something, for example, we want something for the youngsters. We want stories for youngsters at bedtime or whatever. And I'm just saying that because I'm saying it off the top of my head. I haven't even thought of that one before. But you know, if everybody came back and said this would be a good one, could you do story time for children at 5:30 or at 6 o'clock every day? Then we would look at that and say, okay, how can we manage that? But it still goes back. There's a challenge. On my desk, right? These are the CDs that have arrived today.
Oh, I think mine's the third from the left. Yes, I can see it.
And these are all for Fortress Radio. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are band. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are songsters. But none of them are contemporary.
I mean, when you talk band and songster CDs, are we talking modern releases here?
Yes.
I mean, is this something that I could literally say, you know, you say, oh, Radio 4 has played the latest, I don't know, Adele song. That's in order to plug it. Say, okay, I'll go to HMV or I'll play it online. You know, how does it handle with the fact that SBS are trying to make money out of this? And they say, okay, Boscombe Band's latest Sanctuary Volume 4.
Okay. So let's let's take this CD. So there's a CD by the International Staff Songsters. So this one, actually, this one's 2013, so it's a little bit old. But nevertheless, if this was their new CD, the first thing is, as a radio station, we're not putting the CD on and playing it in its full entirety. The programs are set that I've actually set the program so that if it plays an ISS song from this CD, from this album, I should say, it won't play another one from this album for the rest of the day.
Interesting.
Okay, so that's the first.
Presumably that would be that would be separate. So you could, if Fortress Radio have played it, it might be on Regal Zonophone, but it wouldn't, because you've got the difference. So the technical ability to say, we want to say, oh, we've had this record come through, this CD come through. Everyone is talking about this particular track that they've heard, and they've recorded it.
That's right.
You can
and also the difference is that once a quarter, I have to produce a report for the PRS for the licensing, and on that report I have to record how many what track I've played, how many times I've played it, what's the composer, the arranger, what CD it came from, etc. And so all of that comes from the software. And it even tells me how many people were actually listening when that track was played in total. So I can actually find, which ones are kind of been more favourable than others as well.
Yeah, which I think it sounds like the fact that you've not just sort of switched on and sort of plugged the CD player in and said, I'm letting that
No.
play. It's a very, for people who maybe are not aware of this, to say, I heard this recording. How did you get hold of it? Because I'd like to do this.
Yeah.
But as Fortress Radio, you also have this immense fountain of information that's come from the Regal Zonophone stable, that the detail and the labeling and the compositions are really to assist you in being able
Correct.
to play the tracks out.
Yeah.
So
I think the other thing you've got to remember is that a lot of the tracks on Regal Zonophone are, well, how can I put it? They're old-fashioned.
mm-hmm.
They're a particular source where people, if they want to go listen to it, they'll go listen to that.
Yeah.
On a radio station, it's very easy to lose a listener. So if you put something on the radio station that kind of, let's say we put, at the beginning, we did put like an hour of 78 records.
Mm-hmm.
Let's remember the old days, the 78s.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, you saw the listeners kind of drop off, because once you've heard 178, you don't want to hear another a dozen. If you want to do that, you got the Regal Zonophone and listen to yourself. So the radio station is definitely more about kind of today rather than yesterday.
Yeah. Was that something that you became consciously aware of, or was it a case of that you had the ability, okay, people want to listen to Salvation Army music, they can't get to the Citadel, they can't get out, but they can happily sit in their armchair and have the radio, have the phone on, have their device on, as I remember, I think there was as you said, there was a survey many years ago when they were digitizing the old 78s, and the most popular requested piece, I think, was SP&S Band playing the Old Wells, conducted by Eric Ball.
Yeah.
And I remember that piece growing up. I said, that's fun, we can put that on Fortress Radio, and because we have all this ability and this technical command to be able to say, but the reality, as you're saying, is it's not, you could, okay, I could easily do an hour of marches by George Fuller and the ISB and Bernard Adams, but if it's not working, if people aren't listening to it, you've got to change and say, okay, we've got to push, and that's almost the challenge of doing a radio station, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. There's a lot of people say, with radio, you've got to focus in on the listener, and it's not listeners, the listener.
Yeah.
Even though it is listeners. Focusing in on what people want, and also, there are times of the day when more people will listen to a radio than any other time of the day. Now, during the lockdown, it's been completely kind of changed, if you like. But prior to the lockdown, the biggest time for anybody listening to radio was the drive-in shows during the morning, because everybody's going to work.
Yep.
And then again, when they're coming home from work. We realised that at the moment we've got more people listen to our Holiness meeting at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning than any other program. But when cores then reopen and people can get back to having corporate worship, then that will change. And we have no idea how that will affect us, but we know it will. And we know that we're now planning for schedules that will change and go out first thing on a Sunday morning, that will be a little bit more different to how we're doing it at the moment. So today works, but it may not work tomorrow. So we're always looking at how we can change things, how we can make it better. And again, it comes down to this survey that hopefully people will fill in and give us some feedback.
One thing that I think will sort of be interesting is, I don't know how long you've been in an international staff band, but obviously you've been involved in very many recordings over these, and they're very user-intensive, time-intensive things. So have you now had the ability to sort of look back at some of the recordings that you've been involved in, sort of for the first time or after many years? And has that sort of changed your viewpoint on some of these recordings?
I'll be very truthful with you now. So as of today, I've done like 23 years in the ISB, but I had a 7-year gap. I did 10 years, and then because I had changed job and I couldn't fit the band, the ISB, in with the new job, So I left the ISB, and then I was asked to rejoin 7 years later. So, but in total, at the moment, the combined total is 23 years. Now, whenever we do a recording, yeah, there's a lot of intense activity in terms of getting a recording done. Probably more for the bandmaster's point of view than there is from me playing second trombone. But even so, you know, you don't want to turn up to the recording studio and be the one guy that, you know, we have to re-record that one bit of the track because you played it wrong. So there's a lot of intense concentration to kind of get that out. And often we're recording stuff that's in the current repertoire, which often means that when the CD comes out, I've played those pieces on that CD so many times that the CD cover comes and it just gets put on my shelf, and I never listen to it.
Yeah.
And it's still in its wrapper. And it's only since looking at Fortress Radio that, yes, some of those CDs have come off the shelf. I've undone the wrapper and I've gone, oh my goodness, I forgot we recorded this. Or I don't remember recording this piece. Was I actually on that? I can't remember. So yeah, there's, and I guess, you know, when you're doing 2 or 3 CDs a year with such a fine band, that can happen. But slowly, you know, the memory does come back a little bit, and you go, wow, I don't know why we don't play that piece anymore, because I think that's still got a story. It's still got a meaning that for today than it did, you know, back in when we recorded it in 1989 or whatever, you know.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, in your position as a Christian musician, and as a bandsperson, are there any sort of particular pieces that you've recorded over the years that mean a lot to you, that you've listened back and you think, yes, that really touched me at a special time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are 1 or 2, and I think it's probably fair to say that they tend to be live recordings rather than what we did in the studio. 2 that come to mind is Corpus Christi that we did with Robert Redhead, which he composed that for the tour that we did around Canada, and then they had the 4 staff bands in Roy Thompson Hall, and that was our piece. And when I listen to the live recording of that does send shivers down my spine. And I think the other one again is a live recording, and that's the King of Heaven that Ken Downey, which we did at ISB 120. You know, both of those, I think it's because it was in a live setting. There is something different about a live setting and listening to that when you're listening to a recording, because you know that that was it. You've got it warts and all, and any wrong note you're going to get them. But fortunately, when I've listened to them, I can't find any wrong notes. So there's 2 special pieces there.
Yeah. How did you get involved with the ISB in the first place?
How did I get involved? I remember talking to Stephen Pearson when he was the solo trombone player, and saying to him once, "Are there any positions available? You know, if anything became available, I might be interested, or I could be interested." And he said there was nothing at that time. Years went by, and then one day I had a phone call from Chris Priest, who was then playing bass trombone in the ISB.
Yeah, just speak to him.
Yeah, and Chris just said to me, "Hi, Stuart, if you were asked, would you be interested?" And so I said, "Yeah, I'll be interested, yeah." Knowing that I wasn't making any commitment, I'll just be, "Yes, I'll be interested." And literally within 5 minutes of that phone call finishing, the band secretary rang me up and said, "I understand you might be interested in joining the ISB. If that's the case, would you like to come in for an audition?" So I said, "Yeah." Went for the audition. But interestingly, back then, I don't know if the band do it nowadays, but back then I had the audition and they said, "Well, you've passed the audition. However, you need to go home and speak to your wife. Because you need to explain to her that you're going to be away for 8 weekends a year, plus you're going to be doing tours and you're going to be doing this, and there's lunchtime rehearsals as well as a Wednesday night rehearsal, and this is what it means to be a staff bandsman. And unless you have the backing and the support of your wife, then it won't work." So I came home and I said to my wife, I've been given an opportunity to join the ISB. The season has just started. September, there's a season, it goes around to the June of each year. It's just started and they need a second trombone player, and they've asked me if I'd like to do it, and this is what it all means. What do you think? And she was quiet for a moment and then just said, well, I don't really want you to do it, but I don't want to be the person that years later you say, I had the opportunity to join the ISB, but you didn't let me do it. So you can do one season. So 23 seasons later.
Who done your audition?
I just can't count.
Yeah.
Oh, crikey. Who did my audition? Gosh, it was the band secretary and also Ray Bowes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I was Ray Bowes' last appointment to the band. I did like 2 months with the band, and then he retired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Having sat in the band, the ISB band room, you obviously have an incredible array of guests and composers that filter through, not just to put their music on the stand because they're in. I've myself have done it. I'm not a composer, but I've had the pleasure of sitting in on a couple of rehearsals for the sheer joy and pleasure and ability to do it. But starting in, were there any kind of names that came through that you'd only kind of seen on paper and you sort of hadn't met before or crossed paths with?
Well, I think over the years there's been lots. I remember the first time that Ken Downey came into a rehearsal. I'd only heard of him. I'd only seen some of his compositions. Didn't know him. Know him fairly well now, but back then didn't really know him. But also, oh gosh, I can't remember his name. Crikey, he's out in South America somewhere. They'll come back to me. That shows you how my old age is kind of catching up on me. But I think it's not necessarily some of the composers that have made their name. I think one of the things that I've been interested in is seeing how composers have developed.
Yeah.
So Paul Sharman, for example, great guy. We loved having him in the band. If you looked at some of his early compositions, you could see how he's developed as a composer, how he's developed as an arranger, and how the pieces that he's produced now are ahead of what he did in the early days. I heard exactly the same thing from Peter Graham. For many years, his brother Paul sat next to me in the band. And I think it was David Dawes was going to do a cornet solo, one of Peter Graham's solos. And I remember Paul saying, "Oh, Peter wrote this for me when I was in the Wipey band, all these years ago."
Yeah.
And when Peter heard that, David was going to do it, Peter quickly jumped in and went, "Whoa, hang on, when I was composing when I was 17 was a lot different to what I compose now. Let me rearrange it, please." I've been thrilled in seeing some of the younger composers. Andrew Wainwright's another one.
Yeah.
You see some music coming through on the stand and you go, right, okay, don't know this person, but let's see what the piece looks like. And then it's only when 2 or 3 years pass by and you see a few more compositions, you can see how they're developing their own craft and becoming better at what they're doing. That's not to say that their first items are not good. But
I think some of them would say,
there are some compositions that need to be returned.
I do wonder that sometimes. I'm to sort of say, we've had published pieces on our band, and we played them through, and I vividly remember I was playing with still do play with Ipswich Citadel Band when we can. That we were in rehearsal, and Andy got out this piece of music, and it was by a lovely composer, and we played it through, and we just took it off the stand, and we went, "Burn it!" and just chucked it on the floor. I don't know whether it was just we felt we couldn't do it justice, but it just felt. A comment to me afterwards by another band was, "I wonder if he was sniffing something when he wrote it." But,
there was definitely one piece in the whole time I've been in the ISB, one piece that happened to, because one thing that people may not know, but when an ISB rehearsal starts on a Wednesday night, the first half an hour is quite often sight reading, and we literally sight read and record pieces for the Music Council to listen to. Steve Cobb will say, okay, look, this is a Triumph series piece, so just take a look at it. We're just going to record it. The next piece might be a festival series, and he might just try a couple of bars here, a couple of bars there, and they'll say, right, now let's record it. So sight reading is quite heavily part of the band's makeup. But there was one piece that was put on the stand one day. This is quite a few years ago now, and I hope the arranger is not listening to this podcast. But it was, we all know the march, "The Torchbearers."
Yeah.
By Eric Ball. Well, this piece was called "The Swing Bearers."
Not Torchbearers then.
And it was the March Torchbearers, and it was swing time. Ba ba da ba da ba do ba da boo ba ba do.
Glenn Welch.
And it didn't go down very well. I don't think we got past bar 10.
I'm wondering if this is the one I'm thinking of. I have heard a version of that in swing format. If it's not Mr. Welch, I do apologise wholeheartedly.
Yeah, whoever did it, I mean, it might work now, but back then it just
was that because Torchbearers is one of them, I don't want to use the word sacred, but it's almost like it's like the Liberator, it's like the Old Wales, it's like Starlight. It's so kind of, on the plateau iconic. That you don't mess with that. As it, and yet,
probably.
And yet, I was talking to Sam Creamer the other day, and he's not afraid of using really old army songs and giving them a new twist. And you've got people like Andrew Maycock are retaking Gowans and Larson songs and are sort of reinventing the wheel, really. But it's making it, applicable to the present age. So we've got some real golden oldies, but if we don't give them a fresh, dust off and record them for posterity and say, look, we're going to try a bit different, let's do this in a different way. Let's do a bolero version. Let's try this in a jazzy hymn tune arrangement.
Yeah.
So, and in any international star band, as Bill Hines once said, it's really kind of almost impossible to give the ISB something and for them not to be able to play it, because you've got such a high caliber of musicians that I would imagine you can almost play anything that was thrown at you.
I think that kind of happens as well. Yeah, it does seem to happen. There's not much. There have been one or two pieces where it's been a challenge, and that's good for us, because obviously you want to be challenged and you don't want to play easy music every week. But sometimes it's the easy music that can catch you out. It's the slow melodies that can really catch you out. But going back to what you're saying about Eric Ball, and I think it's the iconic image of, that's the Torchbearers. You don't touch it. But there are lots of tunes that nowadays could easily have a new rendition. I remember one bandmaster saying to me, I was looking through some music and I found a march by a famous composer, and I said, oh look, I didn't realize this composer had written this march. We don't hear of it, nobody ever plays it. And he said, and there's probably a very good reason why. And we played it that night with the core band, and I thought afterwards, I now know why it's never played, because it just didn't fit, it just didn't work. There was something lacking in it. So again, that might have been one of his early marches, this composer, who knows. But hey, there's a wealth of music there.
I find that interesting, because one of my side issues is I love to delve into the history of core marches. And for many years, I had a friend of mine who came to me some years ago, and he said, Morgan, you collect all Salvation Army music. He said, I would really, really love to hear the march Ipswich Citadel. I said, well, I know it's been published. I've seen the published music, but as for a recording, haven't got a clue. And phoned the bandmaster, and we managed to, in the archives, find a recording of it. And subsequently played it 3 or 4 times at funerals. And then I was talking to some other core folk and from other cores. I said, oh, I see you've got this core march. I said, oh, golly, don't mention that. I said, we only wheel it out on anniversaries when we're forced to, because otherwise it's the proverbial millstone. I mean,
Yeah.
It's like that wonderful story about Prelude on Lavenham, where I spoke to Doug Askew, and he said we could easily have gone down the march route and had Lavenham 125. He said, but he said you have a march, it gets played, and then it gets left on the stand. And I think you get some composers who can very easily write a march out and say, yep, almost back of the cornflake packet. And there's as much care and attention gone into that as the big Albert Hall piece, but it's kind of forgotten about, or it's written for a special thing. And unless it's, I don't know, for some reason, like your Liberators, Silver Star, Bognor Regis, it kind of languishes between a thorn between two roses kind of thing. So, as a bandmaster, as a bandsman, as a bandsperson, what would you say were your sort of maybe 2 or 3 top pieces that you enjoy, that you would say were your favourites?
As a bandmaster?
As a bandsman, as a bandmaster, you sort of control what the band's playing, but as a player through the years, what pieces have really sort of hit home? I mean, I remember Starlight because it was one of the very first pieces I ever played in the senior band, and that was without knowing on the drum that I had a drum solo.
Well, I think favourites is always a difficult one, because it could be that my favourite today may be a different favourite tomorrow. But what I probably would say more is that when pieces come out onto a stand, invariably I'm at an age now where I can go, do you know what, I remember the first time I played that piece. Or I can remember playing that piece under the baton of Eric Ball, with Eric Ball conducting. Or I can remember playing that with Don Osgood conducting, or with Steban Allen, or whatever. So and I can sometimes then recall the place and the memory of actually when I played that. But there are other pieces that come to mind when they mean a special thing for me, because I enjoyed playing that particular piece at a particular time. So, for example, the first time I ever played French, Don Osgood's transcription of the tune French, first time I ever played that, I'd never seen it before. I sight read it, and it was with Cambridge Heath Band in St Paul's Cathedral on a New Year's Eve watch night service. And they always finish with that piece. And they always sat in the dome. And when you finish that piece on a big chord, and then there's like this 12-second echo, gosh. And so whenever I play French, I always remember that first time I played it, and that feeling of being in St Paul's Cathedral and the echo. And no matter where I am when I play it, I'm listening for that echo at the end. Often it's never there, but in my head and in my memory it's there. So I think for me, it's more favourites are more case of this is my favourite piece for today. But also when music gets put on the stand, it's kind of I recall the history around that piece of when I first played it.
You have said in great detail, which we thank you for, of the evolution and your future plans for Fortress Radio, and how you hope to keep the interest going and to adapt it so that it's serving the purpose for what you hope to. So what are the ambitions and the plans for the future of the Regal Zonophone side of it? Because obviously you're still going to get people send tapes, and you've still got to do the research that's involved in it. How are you planning to keep that sort of up to date and fresh with respect to what it's containing, which is archive recordings and people saying, "Oh, I want to listen to Eric Ball's 1978 recording of the Old Wells"?
Well, there are some things that we've got planned, which sadly I can't tell you about them at the moment because they're still in plan. But if we get the go ahead that we can actually do it, then that will be exciting, because we want to build it out into more of that heritage style of what it is, what it's all about. It's about heritage of music. But as I already mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, one of the things that I'm really keen to do now is to learn more about the different recordings. So if there's anybody out there that can remember being on a recording, if you were on that recording in 1965 of that core band when they did that LP, there's a space on the Regal Zonophone to actually put some notes in there to actually say, oh, yeah, I was there, I remember that. Or they just drop me a line and I'll put it all on myself, you know. But there's a tabs next to the LP saying, this is the recording artist, this is a bit about the artist, about the band or the choir, whatever. This is about the publishers, and then other information. So, you know, if anybody's got information, that's what I'd like to kind of do. I'd like to build it up so it becomes not just a place where people go and listen to the recording, but in the future, you know, say 10 years time, youngsters that are now getting to know about Salvation Army music can go in there and go, oh, right, okay. And then they learn a little bit about that composer or about that bandmaster or about that band, because it might be that they're now at that core. And so therefore they could listen, you know, they could read about some of the historical events of that band and that core. So that's one of the things I'd like to try and do. Because I'm sure we're going to run out of LPs and CDs and cassettes to put on there.
I don't believe that for a second, because I didn't always be something lurking. But I do. I mean, you talk about stories. I mean, I vividly remember. I think it's Sheffield Citadel Band, although I could be wrong on the band, with Herbert Mountain, and they were recording Another Evening at the Citadel, and the LP says, you know, despite the tranquil setting of the recording, there was a gale force wind and a snow drift 2 foot high, and people had to battle to get here to do this recording. And it's actually written on it. And I find that hilarious that, you know, you get people who say, you know, there was a force 10 gale, the bus broke down, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, but we still managed to record it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing, is that, you know, the more that people kind of get on there and add some of the historical content to it, it will benefit people in the future, I'm sure. So that's part of the idea. Yeah.
Well, I want to say thank you very much for taking on the mammoth task of doing Regal Zonophone, and also, you know, we all wish that the very best future for Fortress Radio, and that it goes leaps and bounds, and that it really reflects, you know, the hopes and dreams and the prayers of all who listen to it and all who help run it. Just out of curiosity, do you permit financial support for Fortress Radio, or is that something that has to be done differently?
No, we'd be delighted to have financial support. On the actual website of Fortress Radio, there is a donation page, and we very clearly put in the details there to say this is how much it costs. You know, for £5, we're able to keep the station going for this amount of time, for £10, for £50, etc. The good news is that not a week goes by without a donation coming in,
which is good.
And with those donations, that has helped us to kind of build out more things for the station. It's enabled us to buy some better equipment in terms. The microphone I was using at the beginning was here on this iPhone to record things for like interviews, etc. We've now got some proper equipment because of donations that have come in. And we've now got some regular presenters that we're able to kind of now fit them out. So we're not looking to fit out a complete studio, but sufficiently that we get a better sound than just doing it on an iPhone. So donations are more than welcome, because there is a financial cost of keeping a station going. It's nothing is for free. Actually, one interesting thing there is that somebody did ask, why did we go with an internet station and not with like an FM station or a DAB station? And the real thing is it's cost.
I thought it
so if we were on the FM stations and digital radios, we would be paying anything between 15 to 25,000 a month. But on an internet station, it's in the hundreds a month rather than thousands. So it's kind of it's, you know, if somebody came along and said, yeah, we'd like to donate enough money that you can go on FM, they'd actually have to have deep pockets, but yeah, we would consider it.
Is there I mean, obviously you've done this when you're doing, I would guess you've done this when you research. Is there much of a technical difficulty between an internet radio station and a DAB radio station? in terms of what you're doing with your music?
No, the technical bit in that is round about the ability of the listener to listen in. So if you've got an FM station or a DAB, the listener is more or less guaranteed 100% no interruptions.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with an internet station, first of all, the more listeners that log on, the more that the internet site has to then obviously expand and to be able to cope with that demand. And also, and this is the most important thing, it depends on the Wi-Fi connection of the person who's listening.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
if somebody's got an old Wi-Fi system or their Wi-Fi is not kind of top quality speed, then they might find a few kind of glitches here and there, might find a few gaps.
Mm-hmm.
I have had one or two listeners say, it stopped for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But then when it started again, it kind of hadn't lost its place. It was at the same place. Well, that could be down to their own internet connection. It could be down to our hosting providers. So there is the hosting providers. We can sort that bit out, and we have been, and that's sorted now. But obviously, we're at the mercy of the individual's Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have to. I would have loved to have continued talking, but time has just beaten us, as I knew it would have done, and I kind of need to get on with other things as well. But
yeah. But thank you for
thank
inviting
you
me.
so much for agreeing to talk about the other end of the aspect, not just the recordings of it and your experience with the International Staff Band and the recordings, but also what happens to those recordings. Because as you can say, they can live on those shelves behind you gathering dust, or we can put them online in an efficient and sensible way and have people be blessed by them and know that at the end of the day that we're doing what is respectful and right to everybody in the process. So from the players through to the publishers to the promotions, all the birds are being, catered for in an effective manner. So we thank you for doing that and taking the time out, and also for explaining some of maybe the nickels in the process. Why you do this and how is that being formed. So thank you for taking the time to guide us through it. If you be so kind, I'm going to pray for you and your family at this time, and then I'll switch the recording off, as is the norm of these interviews. So, dear Lord, it's a real privilege to just be able to sit down, to stand up on the train, in the car, on the coach, to be able to put the earphones on and do something which our grandparents, our great-grandparents couldn't dream of, and that is to listen to the music and the worship of the Salvation Army. And we thank you, Lord, that not only does the technology exist, but that people are willing to learn how to use the technology. I thank you for Stuart and his family and for that enormous commitment that they've put into not just striving to make it available, but to make it available to the masses in a way that is right, Lord. It's very easy to go out there and do something and ignore the practicalities and also the legal beagles. But we thank you that it is a problem that is overcomable. We thank you for the time and the commitment of all involved in Regal Zonophone. I pray for Ian in Australia. I've had many wonderful conversations with him and his enthusiasm for that. I pray for Stuart and his family, particularly at this time with all the uncertainty of lockdown and everything that's happening. And also I just pray for the continued support for Regal Zonophone and for Fortress Radio, that it's not just the wonderfulness of getting the CDs and the LPs through, it's the very timing process of going through the step-by-step motions to make sure that everything is ticked correctly. So at the end of the day, a clear conscience and that, yes, Lord, we've done the job correctly because we know that you would have wanted this done properly. And it's to your glory, Lord. And if people come to know you and people can email and say, thank you, Lord, I've started, thank you, Fortress, for that program, for that message, for that track. I wanted to go back and I learned that Bible reading again. I picked up that track and those lyrics came and reminded me of something I was missing. That's the source. That's the reason why we play this music. That's the reason why we thank you, Lord, for the people who devote their lives and their abilities to record it and to make it available. We all know the fact that many, many years ago, the only time you would have heard music is in the local concert hall or in the local church hall. The idea of being able to switch on your phone and your laptop and to be able to hear what you want when you want was a dream many of our grandparents would have thought impossible. So we thank you for that ability, Lord. And we thank you that there are people like Stuart who are willing to go one step further, and not just to get the CDs out there and to expose them to a new market, but to make sure that it's done with all the right intentions and that all the bits and bobs that have to happen are done properly and effectively, and that there are people out there who say, yes, we will help you with this. Yes, if it means I can only give you £5 a month, it all helps to run it. And we thank you for that, Lord. We thank you for the financial donations. We pray that they will be beneficial and fruitful in the days, months and weeks to come, Lord. I just pray for Stuart now in this endeavour, that he will continue to find the strength that he knows comes from you, that when everything seems to be falling down, as I'm sure it will do and sure it has done, that the peace of God that transcends all understanding, that he knows is there for the asking, will come. As the famous song says, peace in our time, Lord, to all the people's peace. I just thank you for the peace and the serenity that he has needed in the past and that he will need in the future. And I pray for the love that he has for you, and I pray for the support and love of his family who continue to support him and just to be there when they all need that centralness around you, Lord, because it's for you, Lord, to God be the glory. And without you, Lord, it's wasted. But you make it happen, and we thank you for that. So I just put Stuart and his family and his friends and his core workers in your hands now, Lord. I pray particularly for Jessie, who I know is far from well and just struggling, but she's looking forward to be able to listen to Fortress, and the family are trying to make that a reality. So I just pray for her now, and I pray for Stuart and his friends, and just thank you, Lord, for this time. Amen.
Thank you.
Right.